They told the police I was senile, but the officer's first question wasn't about my memory. It was about who paid the property taxes since 1981. That's when I understood. Someone had tried to bury me alive in a story I didn't write. I stood in my own doorway at 78, barefoot, holding a half-peeled apple, and listening to a young man with a badge ask if I still recognized my own name. My daughter and son-in-law hovered behind him, nodding gravely like undertakers waiting for a signature. For a moment, the whole scene felt absurd, but I kept my voice steady. Age teaches you how to hold yourself when others want to shake you. The officer, Carter, his badge said, shifted awkwardly. "Mrs. Hensley," he began, "we received a concern that you may not be safely managing your household. We're required to check on you. Could we talk inside?" Required? That word always hides someone else's intentions. I stepped aside without a word. I knew the house was clean enough, the kettle warm, the kitchen bright. I also knew my daughter hated the old wallpaper and would use it as evidence of decline. She walked in with a rehearsed sigh. Her husband avoided my eyes. Carter studied my face as though waiting for confusion to appear. Instead, I handed him the apple and told him to finish peeling it if he had doubts about my coordination. He blinked, then smiled despite himself. My daughter didn't. She spoke first. "Officer, she forgets things, leaves the stove on, misplaces important papers. We're worried." She said it with that soft, tragic voice people use when pretending they've done everything right. "I see," Carter said, turning back to me. "Do you manage your own finances, ma'am?" His tone wasn't accusing, just procedural, but it tightened something in my chest. I folded my hands. "I've paid every property tax bill since 1981. On time, in person." He glanced at my daughter, who suddenly looked like she'd swallowed a stone. Her husband cleared his throat, muttering about possible gaps and misunderstandings. Carter frowned. He asked to see the kitchen, the living room, the hallway. Checking for hazards, he explained. My daughter trailed behind him, pointing out every chipped tile, every creaking hinge, like a tour guide for decline. I said nothing. I simply watched the officer take notes, watched the way his eyes didn't match her words. He noticed my shoes placed neatly by the door, the open newspaper with the crossword half done, the row of labeled jars in the pantry. Order, routine, nothing senile about it. Back in the living room, Carter hesitated before asking the question that betrayed everything. "Who usually handles your bills now, Mrs. Hensley?" I met his eyes and answered calmly. "Still me. Every month." Then I added, "Unless someone here has filed something different behind my back." My daughter paled. Her husband pretended to study the floor tiles. And Carter, young but not foolish, understood that this visit was not about my safety. It was about something they wanted and couldn't wait for. He closed his notebook slowly. His shoulders softened, but his gaze sharpened. Something in the room had shifted. They felt it too. I could tell by the way my daughter suddenly busied herself with a non-existent speck on her sleeve. Carter cleared his throat. "Mrs. Hensley, I'll need to ask a few more questions. Privately, if you don't mind." My daughter started to protest, but he lifted a hand. "Authority doesn't need to shout." I gestured toward the kitchen. My steps were steady, even graceful. I made sure of it. Behind me, I heard my daughter whisper something to her husband, frantic and low. Whatever story they had prepared was beginning to crumble, and they could feel the cracks under their feet. When Carter and I sat down at the kitchen table, he lowered his voice. "Ma'am, something about this doesn't add up." His honesty was a quiet mercy. I nodded, though inside, a deeper truth unfurled, slow, heavy, undeniable. This was only the beginning. Officer Carter sat across from me, elbows resting lightly on the table, as if he didn't want to intrude on the space I'd carved out over decades of early breakfasts and late-night cups of tea. His voice softened, but not in that condescending way younger people sometimes adopt around the elderly. No, his tone was careful, respectful, almost cautious. Mrs. Hensley, I need to ask a few things directly. I hope that's all right. It's your job, I said, folding my hands in front of me. Ask. He nodded, glancing toward the living room where my daughter and son-in-law whispered in furious little bursts. Have you had any incidents recently? Falls, confusion, forgetting appointments, anything like that? I met his eyes steadily. No. He waited a beat, as if giving me room to reconsider. I didn't. All right, he said quietly. Have you authorized anyone to manage your finances? I could feel the question settle at the back of my throat like a stone. It was clear he already suspected something. No, I answered. I've always handled my own accounts. No one else has access. He nodded again, slower this time. Your daughter suggested you've misplaced important documents. Is that true? I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because of how predictable it all was. Officer, I've kept every receipt, every tax record, every insurance paper in labeled folders for 40 years, color-coded. The only thing I misplace these days is my patience. He cracked a brief smile, then straightened when he heard footsteps approaching. My daughter's shadow stretched across the doorway before she appeared, face tight and righteous. Is everything okay in here? We just want what's best for her. That's so, I said quietly. She gave me a look, a mix of pity and irritation, the look a person gives a dog that won't stop barking at nothing. Mom, please don't make this difficult. We're trying to help you. Carter didn't turn toward her immediately. His gaze stayed on me, respectful, but searching. Mrs. Hensley, would it be all right if we took a look at those documents you mentioned? Of course, I said. They're in the study. I rose slowly, not because I needed to, but because moving with deliberation forces others to face the truth of your steadiness. My daughter stepped forward as if to guide me, but I waved her off. I'm not porcelain. I can walk. The study smelled faintly of old paper and lemon oil. I opened the cabinet beside the desk and pulled out a thick binder. Taxes, 1981 through last quarter. I handed it to Carter. He opened it carefully, as though afraid the weight of evidence might break in his hands. Page after page, date, amount, confirmation number. My handwriting, neat and unshaking. My daughter lingered in the doorway, twisting her fingers. How did you remember all this? She asked. I didn't bother to look at her. Because I live here, I said simply. And I care about what's mine. Carter paused at a page from 5 years ago. These payments were made in person? Yes. I like to see the clerk's face. People handle your papers more carefully when they remember you. He murmured something under his breath. Approval, maybe surprise. Then he closed the binder and held it with both hands, as if its truth carried weight. Mrs. Hensley, he said, you seem perfectly capable of managing your affairs. My daughter's voice sharpened. She has good days, officer. She can sound clear even when she's not well. It fluctuates. Carter turned to her fully for the first time. His expression cooled, subtle but unmistakable. Is that so? Because what I'm seeing is consistent competence. Her husband stepped into view, hands shoved into his pockets. Look, we're just worried she might forget something serious. The house, the taxes, the utilities. These things pile up. We're trying to prevent problems. Funny how concerned people become when the word house comes up. I stayed still, but something in me hardened. "Officer," I said, "they mentioned unpaid taxes." "Did they give you specifics?" Carter flipped through his notes. "They stated you had several years of lapses." "Which years?" I asked. He looked at them. They said nothing. He looked back at me and exhaled. "Ma'am, nothing in these records suggests any lapse at all." My daughter's face flushed a bright, panicked red. "Maybe she forgot to file something recently." "Recently?" I repeated. "I paid last quarter in person. I spoke to the clerk about her son's new baby." Carter closed the binder decisively. "I don't see signs of neglect or incapacity, Mrs. Hensley. But I do need to ask one final thing." He lowered his voice. "Has anyone pressured you to sign over responsibilities or property?" The room went silent. My heart didn't race, but something deep inside me, something old, patient, and fierce, finally stirred. For a moment, no one answered him. The question hung in the air like dust caught in a shaft of light. Quiet, simple, and impossible to ignore. Officer Carter didn't rush. He just watched me with that steady, patient expression that told me he already suspected the truth. My daughter shifted her weight from one foot to the other, her mouth tightening as if she was trying to swallow words she hadn't rehearsed. "I asked," Carter repeated gently, "if anyone has pressured you to sign over responsibilities or property." My fingers rested on the edge of the binder. The pages were cool under my palm. Everything I'd kept, every bill, every slip of paper, 40 years of proof that I still had both feet on the ground. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I lifted my eyes and looked at my daughter. She stared at the floor. Her husband's jaw tightened. "I haven't signed anything," I said, "but there have been attempts." Carter nodded once, very slowly. "Can you explain?" I didn't need to raise my voice. "They've urged me to prepare early, to simplify things, to protect myself. But what they really want is access to this house." I tapped the binder lightly. "This house which I paid for and continue to maintain." My daughter's head jerked up. "Mom, that's not fair. We just want to make sure everything is taken care of before—" "Before what?" I asked. She blinked rapidly. "Before something happens." "Something hasn't happened," I said. "That seems to be the part you keep forgetting." She opened her mouth again, but Carter raised a hand, not rudely, but firmly enough to silence her. "I need to understand the full context," he said to me. "Have they filed for any legal authority over your affairs?" I hesitated, not because I didn't know, but because I hadn't wanted to know. A month ago, I'd received a letter from the county office asking for additional documentation. It seemed routine at the time, odd, but not alarming. Now I saw it for what it was, the first tremor before a quake. "I received a notice," I said slowly, "asking to verify my competency for property-related filings. I didn't request that review." Carter's expression sharpened. "Do you still have the notice?" "Yes," I said. I retrieved another folder from the drawer and handed it to him. He read the letter carefully, tracing each line with his eyes. When he finished, he looked up, first at me, then at the two standing behind him. "This request wasn't initiated by the county," he said. "It was filed by an external party, a family member." My daughter exhaled sharply. We were trying to help. He didn't let her finish. A competency review is not a casual formality. It's a legal process that can result in transferring decision-making power away from the homeowner. Her husband spoke up, voice tight. You're making it sound sinister. We didn't think she'd understand the paperwork. We were being proactive. Proactive, I murmured. Interesting word. Carter slid the notice back into the folder with deliberate calm. Mrs. Hensley, based on everything I've seen, heard, and reviewed, there is no evidence that you are unable to manage your home, finances, or personal safety. He turned to them. And I need to be completely clear. Filing for legal authority over someone without grounds is a serious misuse of the system. My daughter's cheeks flushed a blotchy red. But she's confused sometimes. She's 78. I'm 78, I said evenly, not adrift. Carter stood, adjusting the binder beneath his arm. I'll complete my report this afternoon. Mrs. Hensley, I may return with follow-up questions. Nothing intrusive, just protocol. But for now, you're well within your rights, and nothing indicates danger or incompetence. My daughter took a step forward. So, that's it? You just take her word over ours? He looked at her with the same calm firmness he'd shown me. I take evidence. Hers is consistent. Yours is contradictory. Her husband let out a frustrated breath. This is ridiculous. We were just trying to prevent a disaster. Carter shook his head slowly. The only disaster I'm seeing is the pressure you've placed on a capable adult. Their faces stiffened at the word pressure. It was the gentlest term he could have chosen, and still it struck home. I placed the folder back in the drawer, each movement steady. Officer Carter, I said quietly, thank you. He met my eyes, and in that brief moment, I felt something settle inside me. An old steadiness I'd misplaced, not from age, but from years of being worn down by people who mistook love for ownership. I may return tomorrow, he said. There are additional steps I need to check on. You're welcome to, I replied. My daughter opened her mouth again, but no words came. Not this time. And as Carter walked toward the door, binder in hand, I felt the balance of the room shift. Not loudly, not dramatically, but unmistakably. It was the first time in a long while that someone had stood beside me instead of over me. Officer Carter stayed a moment longer in the doorway, as if weighing something he hadn't yet said. My daughter and her husband hovered behind him like shadows that had lost their shape. The house felt strangely quiet, though nothing about this morning had been quiet at all. When Carter finally turned the doorknob, he spoke in a tone that was both official and unexpectedly gentle. I'll follow up tomorrow, Mrs. Hensley. If anything changes, or if anyone contacts you about paperwork, please call the station directly. I nodded. I will. He stepped outside, then paused. And ma'am, keep those records somewhere safe. His eyes flicked toward my daughter briefly, not accusing, but no longer neutral. He'd seen enough to draw his own conclusions. Then he left. The door closed with a soft click, and the silence that followed wasn't peace. It was pressure. My daughter exhaled sharply, the way someone does when they've been forced to drop a mask. Her husband rubbed the bridge of his nose like he had a headache forming. I remained by the door, steady on my feet, waiting to see which of them would speak first. It was her. It's always her. Mom, what on earth were you thinking? She burst out. You made us look manipulative in front of an officer. He practically accused us of lying. I didn't make you look any way, I said quietly. I just told the truth. Her husband scoffed. You acted like we're trying to steal from you. I looked at him, Then, really looked. The stiffness in his shoulders, the flash of irritation he hadn't bothered to hide. "You filed a competency request," I said. "Behind my back. What should I call it?" My daughter threw up her hands. "We were trying to help you. You're getting older. You don't always hear the phone. You forget to call us back. We worry." "You worry," I repeated, "because I don't answer fast enough? That's not worry. That's impatience." She pressed her lips together. "You don't understand how fragile things can get. One mistake." "I haven't made one," I said. "Not with this house. Not with my taxes. Not with my bills. You're the ones who assumed otherwise." Her husband stepped forward slightly, voice tightening. "We thought it was time to plan ahead. That's all." "Planning ahead," I said, "requires honesty, not backdoor filings." For a moment, none of us moved. Sunlight stretched across the rug in a long, warm stripe, touching everything except the two of them. My daughter's eyes darted to the study door, where the binder still lay waiting on the desk. I could almost see the disbelief forming in her. She'd hoped the officer would find chaos, confusion, evidence of decline. Instead, he found order. She spoke again, softer this time. "Mom, you're making this harder than it needs to be. We're just trying to help before something happens." My voice stayed steady. Something hasn't happened, and until it does, I don't need guardians. I need honesty, respect, nothing more. Her husband looked toward the exit, clearly wanting to leave. "Maybe we should come back later." "Yes," I said. "Maybe you should." My daughter hesitated, torn between arguing and retreating. But she must have seen something in my face, some shift she didn't recognize, because she finally picked up her coat without another word. At the doorway, she paused. "We only wanted what was best." I met her eyes. "Then start by wanting it honestly." She didn't answer. They stepped outside, walked to their car, and drove off without looking back. The house grew still again, but this time the quiet felt different. Not empty, unburdened. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a fresh cup of tea, and sat at the table with both hands wrapped around the warm mug. The morning light moved across the floor, slow and steady, like time itself breathing beside me. And for the first time in a long while, the silence in my home felt like it belonged to me. The house felt strangely bright after they left, as if their absence lifted a film off the windows. I sat for a few minutes, letting the quiet settle. But peace doesn't stay long when resentment has been circling overhead for months. It wasn't 10 minutes before my phone buzzed. Once, twice, then again. My daughter had rediscovered her courage now that she was no longer standing in front of me. She always did better when she didn't have to see my face. The first message read, "You embarrassed us in front of a police officer." The second, "You made it sound like we're after your money." The third, longer, "This is what we get for trying to help you." I stared at the screen, feeling neither anger nor sadness. Just a dull, tired recognition. I'd lived long enough to know when someone's version of help was really a shackled favor they expected to collect interest on. I put the phone face down on the table and poured myself another cup of tea. It tasted better without anyone watching over my shoulder. Around noon, I stepped out onto the porch. The air carried that late morning warmth that settles softly on the skin, like an old friend leaning close. I breathed it in. My daughter thought I couldn't manage a household. She'd forgotten I'd managed a life. Through illness, through loneliness, through more years of work than she'd ever logged. Senility wasn't the issue. Convenience was. I watered the geraniums, trimmed a few wilted stems, and swept the porch. My movements were unhurried, deliberate. I wasn't performing for anyone, but I knew enough to understand that visibility was its own form of quiet defense. Several neighbors waved as they passed. One of them, Mrs. Callahan, paused at the sidewalk to chat about the weather and her tomatoes. She didn't ask if I was all right. She didn't tilt her head with that pitying angle. She spoke to me the same way she had for 20 years. It was grounding. When I went back inside, the house was warm with the smell of pine cleaner. I'd started wiping down surfaces without thinking. One of those automatic habits that comes from decades of caring for a space that's yours. My daughter's words echoed faintly. You're making things harder than they need to be. If only she knew that simplicity wasn't something children could grant parents. It's something parents earn, inch by inch, through a lifetime of holding families together. By late afternoon, the phone rang again. This time I answered. Her voice came through sharp and clipped. Mom, we need to talk. I thought we did, I replied. She ignored that. Do you realize how serious this is? Officer Carter hinted we filed something inappropriate. He made it sound like a crime. I didn't make him do that, I said quietly. You handed him the rope. He only noticed you tugging it. She exhaled into the receiver, a long, shaking breath. We were just trying to keep things from falling apart. Things aren't falling apart, I said. You just don't like that they aren't arranged the way you want. Silence met those words. Thick, weighted. She wasn't used to being confronted by the same honesty she wielded so freely. Finally, she said, Why are you being so difficult all of a sudden? You've never questioned us this much. That's because, I answered, I kept believing you still saw me as your mother, not an obstacle to manage. Another silence, colder this time. Then she snapped, Fine. If you want to handle everything yourself, do it. But don't expect us to fix anything when it goes wrong. I didn't raise my voice. I won't expect anything. She hung up. The click of the receiver lingered in the air like the last note of a song that had played far too long. I stood for a moment, my hand resting lightly on the counter, feeling neither defeated nor triumphant. Just clear. They weren't angry because I'd embarrassed them. They were angry because I'd stopped bowing my head. The sun dipped slowly outside, casting warm light across the kitchen floor. I finished my tea, washed the cup, and placed it gently back on the shelf. My hands were steady. Whatever came next, I would face it the same way I'd faced everything else in my life, upright, awake, and unafraid. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. Not from pain, though my joints had their usual complaints, but from a kind of restless clarity. When someone tries to take your life out of your hands, you feel it long after the threat passes. It sits in your chest like a stone. By the time the sun reached the porch, I already knew I needed more than indignation. I needed legal footing. Feelings don't hold up in front of people who see you as replaceable. I brewed coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. My old neighbor's son, now a family attorney downtown. He'd once told me, half joking, "If you ever need a lawyer, Mrs. Hensley, call me before things get messy." I supposed this counted as messy enough. He answered on the second ring. "Good morning, this is Mark." "Mark, it's Margaret Hensley. I'm sorry to bother you." He paused. Then his tone brightened with recognition. "Mrs. Hensley? Never a bother. What can I do for you?" I took a breath. "I need to understand my rights. and I need to make sure no one takes liberties with them again." He didn't rush me. He let me explain, calmly, plainly, what had happened. The police visit, the false statements, the competency inquiry I hadn't authorized. There were no dramatics in my telling. I'd lived long enough to know facts carry their own weight without embellishment. When I finished, he exhaled slowly. "You did the right thing calling me. A competency filing without medical evidence is borderline abusive. At minimum, it's a misuse of the process." "It wasn't the process that frightened me," I said. "It was their willingness to pretend I was fading just to speed their plans." "I understand," he said gently. "I'd like to meet today. We'll go over your documents and protections. Are you available at 2? 2 sounded perfect. Waiting would only stiffen the worry in my chest. "I'll be there." After hanging up, I changed into a clean blouse and combed my hair until it lay smooth. I wasn't dressing for him. I was dressing for myself, for the version of me who still believed dignity was something earned in how we showed up to our own defense. The bus ride downtown was steady and slow, giving me time to think. People always assume older women drift through life half aware, but the truth is, age sharpens the senses in its own way. You learn what danger feels like long before it knocks politely on your door. Mark welcomed me into his office with a warm handshake. He'd grown into a serious-looking man, but his smile still had that open, earnest quality I remembered from years ago. He offered me tea, sat across from me at a polished wooden table, and opened a notepad. "Let's start with your financial structure," he said. "Do you have any active powers of attorney?" "No," I answered, "and I'd like to keep it that way." He nodded. "Good. Do your daughter or son-in-law have access to any accounts?" "No." "And your property? Everything is titled solely under your name?" "Yes." He smiled faintly. "Then you're in a strong position. What they attempted has no legal standing." I felt my shoulders ease just a fraction. "But," he continued, "it would be wise to reinforce your independence, not because you're at risk, but because they've shown they're willing to test boundaries." He explained my options clearly: updating my will, establishing a protective trust, filing a formal note with the county that any future inquiries must come directly from me. Each step was like putting a lock on a door I hadn't realized outsiders were rattling. At one point, he looked at me with genuine concern. "Have they pressured you before, maybe financially or emotionally?" "Not in ways that left marks," I said, "but enough to leave impressions." He nodded, understanding more than I'd said. By the time he finished his outline, I felt something shift inside me. Not triumph, not anger. Just solidity, the sense of reclaiming ground I'd let others trample out of habit. "I'll prepare the paperwork," he said. "You'll have full control, with buffers against interference. It's your life, Mrs. Hensley. We're just making sure the law respects that." I thanked him and left the office with a steadier step than I'd had going in. Outside, the afternoon sun felt warm on my face, and as I walked to the bus stop, I realized something simple and strong. I hadn't defended myself because I was afraid. I'd defended myself because I finally remembered I was worth defending. When I got home from the attorney's office, the afternoon light was settling over the house in that soft, forgiving way it only does when you've made a hard decision and stood by it. I set my bag down on the hall table and walked through each room slowly, almost thoughtfully, as though checking the edges of my life for loose seams. Everything looked the same, but I didn't feel the same. Strength does that. It doesn't change the world. just the way you occupy it. My phone buzzed again. I let it ring twice before I picked it up. It was a voicemail from my daughter, her voice tight, clipped, but controlled. "Mom, we heard you went to see a lawyer. This is unnecessary. You're escalating things. Please call us back so we can straighten this out." Her tone made it clear what straighten meant. Bring me back into alignment with their plans. I didn't call back. Instead, I sat at the dining table and opened the metal box that held my financial records. I'd kept everything over the years: bank statements, insurance summaries, tax receipts, a lifetime of order laid out in crisp paper. As I sorted through the stacks, I noticed a pattern I hadn't allowed myself to truly see until now. The frequency of small withdrawals made for emergencies, the gifts that had turned into expectations, the quiet way responsibility had shifted from them to me without any discussion. There was no crisis buried in these pages, only evidence of slow, persistent taking. And I had let it happen because I believed generosity was a kind of love. Today, I understood that generosity without boundaries becomes a door anyone can walk through. I made notes for Mark's review, accounts to reinforce, payments to restructure, titles to verify. My handwriting stayed neat, deliberate. My mind felt clear, even steady. Age hadn't taken anything from me that mattered. People simply assumed it had. Late in the afternoon, I stepped outside to check the mail. A few envelopes, nothing remarkable, until I saw one from the county tax office. My stomach tightened, not from fear, but from recognition. The envelope was thin, formal, stamped with the date. I opened it right there on the porch. Inside was a confirmation. Your recent inquiry for competence review has been placed on temporary hold pending verification. There it was. Proof. Someone had pushed harder than they wanted to admit. Someone had tried to start a process that could have stripped me of my rights. And if Officer Carter hadn't asked the right questions, I might have never known. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my pocket. This wasn't panic. This was clarity. I walked back inside with the calm of a woman who'd finally noticed the cliff beneath her feet and stepped away before anyone could give her a shove. The phone rang again. My daughter, insistent now. I let it ring until it stopped. When the house grew quiet once more, I felt a new kind of peace settle over me. Not the soft, passive peace of letting things slide, but the firm, grounded peace that comes when you decide, at last, to take yourself seriously. I sat by the window, watching the evening light gather in the corners of the yard. Whatever they planned next, I was no longer the woman who silently hoped for their goodwill. I was the woman who had receipts, witnesses, and a lawyer. And I intended to use them. The next morning, I woke with a steadiness I hadn't felt in years. Not energy. No, at 78. Energy isn't something you wake with. It's something you gather slowly, like warm water in a basin. But clarity, that was new. Clarity has its own kind of vigor. I dressed, made my tea, and sat at the kitchen table with all the documents spread before me. Today wasn't about reflection. Today was about action. At 9 sharp, Mark called. "Mrs. Hensley, I've drafted everything we discussed. If you agree, we'll file it all before noon." "Let's do it," I said. He paused. "You sound ready." "I am." He outlined the steps, revoking all informal permissions, filing a notice with the county blocking any inquiries unless submitted personally by me, restructuring my accounts so no one, not even someone who guessed, could gain access. He suggested placing my essential assets into a protected trust with myself as sole controller. "This isn't about cutting people out," he said gently. "It's about safeguarding your independence." "I understand," I replied. And I did. I signed the documents he emailed over, each signature steady and clear. With every stroke of the pen, a different weight left my chest. Old obligations, quiet fears, the years of tiptoeing around other people's expectations. When I sent everything back, Mark confirmed he'd begin filing immediately. "That competency request they submitted," he said at the end, "will be void once our notice is processed. No one can pursue another without medical evidence, and they certainly don't have that." For the first time since the police visit, I felt something close to gratitude for the system itself. Imperfect, slow, but sturdy when you know where to stand. After lunch, I walked through the house, touching surfaces I'd cared for decades. The banister I'd polished, the window frames I'd painted, the kitchen counter worn smooth by years of kneading dough. People think independence is about what you can physically do, but that's not quite true. It's about knowing what belongs to you, what you've held, tended, kept upright. This house wasn't wood and plaster. It was my life's continuity. Around 3, my phone rang again. I expected my daughter. Instead, it was Mark. "One more thing," he said. "I filed a formal revocation notice regarding any prior attempts to request authority over your estate. The county must now list your daughter and son-in-law as non-eligible petitioners unless you approve otherwise." I closed my eyes slowly, letting that sink in. "Thank you." "It's just protection," he reminded me. "You deserve that." After we hung up, I stepped outside into the late afternoon air. The sky was clear and the world felt unusually still. Across the street, a delivery man was dropping off a package. A woman walked her dog past my porch. Normal life, untouched by the small storms people try to create when they feel entitled to someone else's future. My daughter texted again. "We need to talk. You're making things hostile." I typed nothing. Hostile wasn't defending myself. Hostile was pretending I no longer recognized my own name to speed up an inheritance. I slipped the phone into my pocket, walked back inside, and placed the completed legal packet in the drawer beside my bed. My drawer. In my room. In my home. For the first time in a long while, I felt not just safe, but sovereign. Whatever they believed about my age, my mind, or my strength didn't matter now. The law no longer bent in their direction, and neither did I. By the next morning, the backlash had begun in earnest. My daughter called twice before 8, each time letting the phone ring until the sound echoed through the house like a distant alarm. When I didn't answer, she switched to messages, long, frantic ones about miscommunication, hurt feelings, and how I had misunderstood their intentions. I read them all without replying. There was no misunderstanding. There never had been. What they were feeling now wasn't hurt. It was loss of control. Around 10, I heard a car pull into my driveway. I looked through the blinds and saw my son-in-law getting out, shoulders tense, jaw set. He didn't come with kindness in his step. He came with indignation. When I opened the door, he didn't even say hello. "We need to clear the air," he began, pushing the words forward. "You've taken things too far." I stood in the doorway, neither inviting him in nor blocking his view. "I've taken exactly the steps necessary." He rubbed the back of his neck, the way he did when preparing for an argument he thought he would win. "Mark called us," he said. "He told us you restricted our ability to help you. You made it sound like we were exploiting you." "That's not fair." "It's fairer than what you attempted," I replied. "You're twisting everything," he snapped. "We weren't trying to control your life. We were trying to make sure nothing slipped through the cracks." "Nothing has ever slipped through the cracks," I said calmly. "Not once. Your concern began only when the house became a focus." He looked away, just for a second, but it was enough to confirm what I already knew. "Look," he said, softening his tone as if changing tactics. "We love you. You know that. But this legal stuff, it makes things awkward." "Awkward for whom?" I asked. "Me or you?" He didn't answer. "I've handled my affairs for nearly 8 decades, I continued. "You filed a competency review behind my back. You told the police I was slipping. And now you want to pretend this is about love?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. "You should go home," I said quietly. For a moment, he just stood there, caught between anger and uncertainty. Then he shook his head and walked back to his car without saying goodbye. The tires crunched over the driveway gravel, then faded into the distance. When the sound was gone, the house felt larger, as if his presence had been pressing on the walls. I made tea and carried it out to the porch. The sun was warm, gentle on my skin. A few birds fluttered in the hedges. Ordinary peace returned with surprising ease, as if it had been waiting for permission to re-enter my life. In the afternoon, my daughter sent a new message. "Dad would be ashamed of you for shutting us out." It was a sharp one, designed to pierce. But grief taught me long ago that guilt is a weapon people use when they're afraid of consequences. I replied with a single sentence. He would be ashamed of dishonesty. I put the phone down and returned to my gardening. The soil felt cool under my fingertips, grounding, patient. My hands moved slowly, deliberately, as though reminding the earth and myself that I was still here, still capable, still in charge. By dusk, the garden looked tidier, and my mind felt clearer. They could push, cajole, accuse. But none of it changed the truth. I hadn't become stronger this week. I'd simply stopped being quiet. That evening, after the sun had slipped behind the neighbor's maple tree and the porch shadows grew long and blue, I heard a soft knock at the door. Not urgent, not demanding, just a gentle, almost hesitant tap. When I opened it, I found young Daniel from next door standing there with a toolbox in one hand and a cautious smile on his face. "Evening, Mrs. Hensley," he said. "Sorry to bother you. I noticed your porch light flickers when it's windy. Thought I could take a look." I hadn't realized it flickered, though now that he mentioned it, I remembered the faint buzzing last week. "Come in, dear," I said. "You're not bothering me at all." Daniel stepped inside, taller than I remembered, though he'd never been small. 19 and still growing into himself, with a kind face he didn't know how to hide behind hardness. His family had moved in 6 years ago, and I'd watched him go from a quiet boy to a gentle young man who still asked how my day was even when his own looked heavy. He went straight to the light switch, testing it, listening to the faint hum. "Loose wire," he said softly. "I can fix it in a few minutes." I sat at the kitchen table while he worked. It was comforting, the sound of someone moving with purpose, not accusation. After a moment, he spoke over his shoulder. "I saw your daughter's car here yesterday. Everything okay?" I didn't answer immediately. It wasn't a secret, but it wasn't a story I wanted to spill carelessly. Still, Daniel had earned honesty in the way most people never learned to, by showing up without expecting anything. "Family disagreement," I said. "They think I can't manage things anymore." He turned slightly, brow furrowing. "You? Not managing?" He shook his head. "My mom says you run that house better than she runs ours." The compliment warmed something inside me I hadn't realized was chilled. "Your mother is very kind," I said. "It's not kindness," he replied. "It's just true." He tightened one last screw, tested the switch again, and the light shone without a flicker. He looked pleased, not proud. There's a difference. Proud makes noise. Pleased just rests quietly in the chest. Before he put his tools away, he hesitated. "If you ever need help with anything, heavy lifting, repairs, or just someone to check something, you can call me. I mean it." I studied his face. The earnestness there. No angle. No hidden purpose. Just a young man raised with decency. "Thank you, Daniel. That means more than you know." He shrugged, as if unsure what to do with gratitude. "You've helped me plenty," he said. "Those years you looked after me after school? Let me read at your table. My mom was working 2 jobs then. You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," I said simply. "Well," he replied, slinging the toolbox over his shoulder, "now I want to help you." I walked him to the door, watching him cross the yard with an easy stride. The porch light glowed steady above me, no longer flickering. The house felt steadier too, as though acknowledging that kindness, when it arrives without strings, repairs more than wires. When I stepped back inside, the quiet felt different, not empty, but companioned somehow. Funny how one sincere visit could soften a day that had been stiff with strain. It struck me then, gently but unmistakably. Not all care comes disguised as protection or control. Some care comes quietly, from people who owe you nothing and yet still choose to show up. And sometimes, that kind of care is the truest kind of all. Officer Carter returned 2 days later, just after lunch, when the house still smelled faintly of the soup I'd made. I saw his patrol car through the window and felt no fear, only a quiet readiness. When someone has stood up for you once, you recognize the shape of their footsteps. He greeted me with a polite nod. "Mrs. Hensley, do you have a moment?" "Of course," I said, stepping aside. "Come in." He entered with the same respectful caution he'd had on his first visit, but this time his posture carried something else. Certainty. He held a small folder under his arm. No binder, no clipboard. Just one neat folder, and I suspected its contents would change the tone of this week for good. We sat at the table. He folded his hands. "I wanted to follow up on the investigation," he said, "and to inform you of several findings." I offered him tea, but he shook his head gently. "Thank you, but this won't take long." My heart didn't race. It simply waited. "The inquiry your family initiated," he began, "has been reviewed by our department and the county office. It was flagged as irregular. There was no supporting evidence, no medical documentation, no incident reports. Nothing that would justify a competence evaluation." I nodded once. "I suspected as much," he continued, his voice firmer now. "Because of that, the request has been dismissed. Completely. And your name has been marked to prevent future filings without direct contact with you." He tapped the folder lightly. "The county will send you written confirmation." A warmth spread across my chest. Relief, yes, but also something steadier, like a beam being set correctly back into place. He glanced toward the framed photos on the shelf, then back to me. "I also filed my report regarding the statements made during our visit. There were inconsistencies, significant ones." "From them," I said. He hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. Claims about unpaid taxes contradicted by records. Claims of unsafe conditions contradicted by observation. Claims of cognitive decline contradicted by, well, everything I witnessed." I let out a slow breath. Thank you, officer. Truly. He looked almost embarrassed by the gratitude. It's my duty, ma'am. But I wanted to make sure you heard this directly. You were clear, organized, and fully competent. There's no question about that. The words settled over me gently, like a shawl placed around my shoulders. I hadn't doubted myself. Not truly. But hearing it out loud did something I didn't expect. It lifted the last shadow of their accusation. Carter opened the folder and slid a single sheet toward me. This is a summary for your records. It also notes that any further complaints must be substantiated with evidence, not assumptions. I read the page slowly. My name, my address, the official seal, the dismissal. It was all there. Plain, simple, undeniable. I appreciate your thoroughness, I said. He gave a small smile. I appreciate people who take care of themselves. You'd be surprised how rare that is. I almost laughed. I've had plenty of practice. He stood to leave. If you experience any more pressure or questionable behavior, you can call me directly. I've noted your case personally. I rose as well. I hope that won't be necessary. He paused at the door, hands in his pockets. So do I. But some situations, he chose his words carefully, have patterns. I knew what he meant. So did he. When his car pulled away, I closed the door and leaned my back against it, letting the quiet fill the space he'd left. The house felt different again, lighter, clearer, almost humming with the presence of something regained. Not victory, validation. The truth had been seen, documented, sealed. And now the next steps, whatever they would be, belonged entirely to me. My daughter finally appeared 2 days after Officer Carter's visit, though she didn't bother to warn me she was coming. I saw her through the front window, walking up the path with the heavy, determined stride of someone preparing for a confrontation she intended to win. She didn't bring her husband this time. That told me everything about the angle she'd chosen. Persuasion first, pressure later. I opened the door before she could knock. She looked startled for half a second, then smoothed her expression into something polite, almost brittle. "Mom," she said, "we need to talk." "Then come in," I replied. She stepped into the living room and glanced around, cataloging everything as if searching for proof to validate her doubts. She found none. The room was tidy, sunlit, calm. I stood near the armchair. She remained standing too, arms crossed tightly. She started with a sigh, an old tactic. "I don't know why you've made this so combative. We never wanted things to get messy." "You filed to take control of my affairs," I said gently. Things were messy before I ever responded. Her eyes narrowed. "That's not what we were doing." "I read the documents," I answered. "I read the county notice, and I read the officer's report." The way she stiffened told me she hadn't expected that last part. "Carter exaggerated," she said quickly. "He misunderstood us." "No," I said softly. "He understood perfectly, and so do I." Her shoulders sagged for a moment, the truth pressing down harder than she wanted to admit. Then she tried a new approach, one she thought might unsettle me. "Mom, if something happened to you tomorrow, who would handle everything? Who would know what bills to pay? What accounts you have? You think strangers will care?" "Strangers haven't lied to the county about my mind," I replied. "Strangers haven't tried to cut me out of my own life." "That's not fair," she snapped. "It's factual." Her breath trembled. "We were overwhelmed. We thought you needed help." "Help," I repeated, "is something offered, not seized." She fell silent. Not because she agreed, but because every explanation she'd prepared sounded thin in the wake of what had already been revealed. The afternoon light illuminated her face, and for a brief second, she didn't look angry. She looked lost. A woman who had expected gratitude and found boundaries instead. "I don't want this distance between us," she said finally. "But you've made decisions without us." "My decisions are mine to make," I replied. "And your discomfort doesn't make them wrong." She looked away, jaw tightening again. "So what now? You're cutting us out completely?" "No," I said. "But things will be different." She waited, arms still folded, bracing herself. "You will not manage my finances," I said calmly. "You will not contact the county or the police on my behalf. You will not speak about my health as though it is declining when it is not." Her throat moved in a small swallow. "If you want to visit," I continued, "you may. If you want to talk, you may. But you will not treat me as someone who has already stepped out of her own life. I haven't." She blinked fast, perhaps the closest she'd come to tears in years. "You're shutting me out," she whispered. "No," I said, softening my tone. "I'm asking you to see me as I am, not as you fear I'll become." For the first time in our conversation, she looked at me directly. Really looked. And behind the resentment, the panic, and the bruised pride, I saw something small and trembling. The child she once was, afraid of losing what she loved, grabbing at it the only way she knew how. But fear isn't license, and love isn't possession. She finally nodded, jerky, uncertain. "I need time," she said. "So do I." She walked to the door without another argument. At the threshold, she paused, as though wanting to turn back, but she didn't. She stepped outside into the fading light and closed the door behind her. The house exhaled with me. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet. But it was an honest beginning. The day after my daughter left, the house settled into a quiet that didn't feel lonely. It felt rightful. A different kind of quiet than before all this began. Not the silence of being overlooked, but the silence that follows when truth has finally been spoken aloud. I moved through the morning slowly, tending to the small rituals that make a life feel lived. Opening curtains, watering plants, warming yesterday's soup. Nothing dramatic, just steadiness. By mid-afternoon, my phone buzzed again. I checked the screen, expecting more accusations, but it was a short message from my daughter. "I need time. I'll call when I'm ready." There was no accusation this time. No attempt to rewrite the story. Just a sentence with the weight of someone who had, at last, run out of justifications. I didn't reply. Some messages don't require a return. They simply need room to breathe. I spent the next hour reviewing the documents Mark had helped me file. The protective notices, the account safeguards, the trust structure. Each page felt like a railing I could hold on to. Something solid between me and the storm of other people's expectations. I wasn't planning revenge, and I wasn't nursing bitterness. I was simply ensuring that my life remained mine, not an inheritance waiting to be claimed. Late in the afternoon, the doorbell rang. This time it wasn't family. It was the mailman, handing me an envelope stamped with the county seal. Inside was the official confirmation. The dismissed competency filing, the notation restricting future attempts, and a separate statement indicating the misuse of process. Nothing accusatory, just factual. A record that would outlive memory. I placed the letter in my study drawer, right next to the documents Officer Carter had given me. Paper has a way of holding truth at room temperature. Calm, unemotional, undeniable. Around 5, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea. The air was cool, soft, almost tender against my cheek. Across the street, Daniel waved as he returned home from work. He didn't come over, just lifted his hand in that easy way of his, like the world wasn't complicated at all. I found comfort in that gesture, simple as it was. Support doesn't always arrive in grand gestures. Sometimes it's just someone remembering you exist without wanting anything in return. As the sun dipped lower, the phone rang again. Not my daughter this time, but my sister-in-law from out of state. She'd heard some things, she said, her voice cautious, testing the waters before stepping in. I told her the truth in plain words. No theatrics, no anger, just the events as they happened. She grew quiet. "Margaret," she finally said, "you've always been stronger than people think." I smiled faintly. Stronger than even I remembered. We talked a little longer about the weather, her garden, the small aches that come with age. And then she said something that lingered even after the call ended. Protecting yourself isn't selfishness. It's maturity. When I hung up, twilight had settled softly over the yard. I watched the last of the light fade behind the trees, feeling neither triumphant nor wounded, just steady. My daughter would need time, and I would give her that, not out of guilt but out of choice. Boundaries aren't walls, they're doors with locks. You choose when to turn the key. Inside, the house felt warm, safe, decisively mine. I walked through each room one more time, not to check for danger, but to appreciate what I'd kept upright. Nothing about my world had shrunk these last weeks. If anything, it had finally expanded to fit me again. The following week passed quietly, the kind of quiet that feels earned rather than imposed. Each morning, I woke with a little more steadiness, a little more certainty that the ground beneath me was mine again. I kept to my routines: tea, the newspaper, tending the garden. Yet everything felt subtly different, as if the world had shifted half an inch in my favor. Not loudly, just enough to feel the balance return. One afternoon, Mark called with the final drafts of the documents we had discussed. "Whenever you're ready," he said, "we'll finalize the trust and update your will." His voice held no urgency. He understood that decisions of this kind moved at the pace of clarity, not pressure. I told him I'd come by the next morning. That night, I sat at my desk with the house quiet around me, the lamp casting a warm circle of light across the paperwork. A lifetime distilled onto a few pages, my assets, my choices, my wishes. It was strange to see it all neatly typed and waiting for my signature. Not morbid, not heavy, just clear. These were decisions I'd postponed because I assumed my daughter would act with the same care I had given her entire life. But love without boundaries, I've learned, can grow into entitlement if left unchecked. I opened the drawer where the county letters lay. The dismissal, the restrictions, the formal acknowledgement of misuse. I studied them as though confirming once more that I had not imagined any of it. People sometimes rewrite their own actions to avoid facing who they've become. Paper, however, does not. When I arrived at Mark's office the next morning, he greeted me with the same respectful warmth as before. The documents were already arranged neatly on the conference table. "This trust," he explained, "keeps full authority in your hands. It simply puts legal distance between you and anyone who feels entitled to your estate." "And my daughter?" I asked. "She remains a relative," he said gently, "but she will no longer have the option to petition control without your express permission." I nodded. I had expected as much, but hearing it confirmed settled something deep inside me. We reviewed each section carefully: the property protections, the medical directives that required my signature alone, and finally, the will. I held the last page for a long moment before signing, not because I was uncertain, but because I wanted to honor the gravity of choosing the shape of my legacy. I named Daniel, not as the owner of my life, but as the future steward of the things I could no longer carry once I left this world. The boy who showed me care without calculation deserved something solid to grow from. My daughter would inherit keepsakes, letters, items of sentiment, not punishment, not cruelty, just fairness. The weights balanced honestly, without resentment. When I signed the final line, Mark gathered the documents with a nod of approval. "You've protected yourself well," he said. "And you've been thoughtful." "It feels like putting everything back where it belongs," I replied. He smiled. "That's exactly what you've done." Walking out into the sunlight afterward, I felt lighter than I had in years. The morning air held a clean coolness, and the breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass. I moved slowly down the steps, not because I was frail, but because I wanted to feel the solidity of each step. On the ride home, I watched the town pass by, the storefronts, the church, the small park where families gathered on weekends. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. I was not the woman waiting quietly for others to treat her fairly. I was the one deciding, with clarity and care, the terms of her own life. When I reached my house and set the new documents in my study drawer, a quiet truth settled over me. I had not taken anything from my daughter. I had simply reclaimed what was already mine. In the days that followed, the house settled into a peace that felt almost like a long exhale, one I hadn't realized I'd been holding for years. I moved through the rooms with a kind of gentle ownership, touching the familiar edges of my life as if reacquainting myself with an old friend. Nothing dramatic happened. No confrontations. No urgent calls. Just the soft rhythm of quiet mornings and steady afternoons, each one reminding me that dignity, once reclaimed, doesn't slip away easily. My daughter didn't call right away. I had expected that. Hurt pride moves slowly, especially when it's mixed with shame, confusion, and the sudden understanding that someone you thought you could direct has stepped firmly out of reach. When she finally did send a message, simple, brief, "I hope you're all right," I answered just as simply, "I am." It was the truth. I didn't add anything more. Healing doesn't come from explaining yourself. It comes from living in a way that makes explanations unnecessary. One evening, I stepped out into the yard to trim the lavender. The air was warm, carrying that soft summer smell of cut grass and weathered soil. As I worked, I noticed Daniel leaning on the fence between our yards, his expression easy and open. "Evening, Mrs. Hensley," he called. "Garden looks great." "It's looked better," I replied, smiling, "but it's getting there." He hopped over the small gate and helped me gather the cut stems into a neat pile. He didn't ask about my daughter, or the police, or the legal filings. He just worked beside me in companionable silence. When we finished, he brushed dirt from his hands and said, "My mom's making pot roast tomorrow. She asked if you'd like a plate." "I would," I answered, and I meant it. After he left, I lingered in the yard a while longer, watching the soft spill of dusk settle across the porch. It occurred to me that life rarely falls apart the way people fear, suddenly, loudly, unmistakably. More often, it unravels quietly, thread by thread, until one day you look down and realize the fabric no longer fits. But sometimes, and this part people forget, you can stitch it back together. Not perfectly, not as it once was, but in a way that makes it yours again. Later that night, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea. The documents I'd signed sat safely in their drawer. My house felt solid around me, as though the walls themselves approved of the boundaries I'd finally set. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindictive. I felt settled, a feeling I hadn't known in years. I thought about my daughter, not with anger, but with a kind of quiet ache. I hoped she would grow from this. I hoped she would learn that love without respect is just possession in softer clothing. Perhaps she would reach that understanding. Perhaps not. But her growth was her responsibility, not my burden. As for me, I'd finally stepped back into the center of my own life. At 78, that felt like both a victory and a homecoming. I finished my tea, rinsed the cup, and turned off the kitchen light. The night outside was calm, the kind of calm that settles deep in the bones. I stood by the window for a long moment, watching the darkness settle gently across the yard, and felt gratitude rise quietly within me. Not gratitude for what I'd endured, gratitude for what I'd reclaimed. I had been tested, not by illness, but by the people who assumed weakness where there was none. And in the end, I learned something simple and steady. Age may bend the body, but clarity strengthens the spine. I walked to my bedroom, the floor cool beneath my feet, and felt a quiet certainty follow me down the hall. Tomorrow would come, as it always does, and I would meet it with the same steadiness I'd earned the hard way. And if someone one day reads my story and sees a bit of their own life in it, then perhaps they'll remember this. You are allowed to protect what is yours, even if the world thinks you're too old to notice when someone tries to take it. If you've walked a mile in shoes like mine, or suspect one day you might, stay with stories like these. They remind us of our strength when others try to speak over it. Follow for more.